What's birth rape? From birthraped.wordpress.com. I can't possibly explain birth rape better than Amity Reed at the F Word. Quote, a woman who is raped while giving birth does not experience the assault in a way that fits neatly within the typical definitions we hold true in civilized society. A penis is usually nowhere to be found in the story, and the perpetrator may not even possess one. But fingers, hands, suction cups, forceps, needles, and scissors, these are tools of birth rape, and they are wielded with as much force and as little consent as if a stranger grabbed a passerby off the street and tied her up before having his way with her. Women are slapped, told to shut up, stop making noise, and a nuisance of themselves, that they deserve this, that they shouldn't have opened their legs 9 months ago if they didn't want to open them now. They are threatened, intimidated, and bullied into submitting to procedures they do not need and interventions they do not want. Some are physically restrained from moving, their legs held open or their stomachs pushed on. Close quote. Birth rape is the violence and assault women are subjected to by those they are trusting to safely care for them while they give birth. It is ignoring a woman's refusal of procedure. It is anything which, in any other situation, would be considered assault or battery. It is the culture of intimidation, threats, and coercion prevalent in hospitals today, which has even spread to some midwives. Those who abuse pregnant and birthing women under the guise of care giving need to be called to account. Sadly, most people are unwilling to admit women are routinely assaulted by doctors, nurses, and midwives. Women need to tell their stories so that one day these abusers can't hide behind claims of doing their jobs to avoid the legal and professional repercussions of their abuse. 106 comments. Karan White says, this is what I went through at Bellevue Hospital in Manhattan. They even went so far as to falsify medical records and place a security guard at my door to keep me from leaving and seeking care elsewhere. I ended up having a C-section in which they dropped a knife, cut my hip, and didn't bother stitching the gash. It is a complete violation of the trust we as women in labor afford those who are supposed to care for us. Jet says, don't forget that after she was born, they wouldn't allow you a breast pump, so now you can't breastfeed, and constantly ignored your request for your medicine, which you cannot go without. I also believe they ignored your request for pain medicine on top of the medicine which you were prescribed, and I had to track down the nurse 3 or 4 times over the course of an hour to keep pestering them about getting it done. I also believe the staff was making fun of you and your guests behind your and their backs, were nasty and snarky with you to your face while pretending to have your best interest in place, spelled your daughter's name wrong, etc. Bellevue is the worst hospital ever. Oh yeah, and the internal stitches from the C-section that you didn't want got infected because they did them wrong and were sticking out of the wound. Elisa Snyder says, hello, I'm writing a paper for my English class about birth rape. Up until a few months ago, I had no idea any of this happened. If anyone is interested in telling me your story to show the impact it has on females, please email me at blah, 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 blah. Veronica B. says, there is a huge difference between rape and the violent intervention that some women experience during childbirth. After such a traumatic experience, you have legal avenues available to go to and report experiences to a medical board and others to stop this from happening to other women. I've been raped 4 times. I'm a rape 4 times, incest and torture survivor, and believe the psychiatric care I am now on will help me in the years to come. However, claiming or associating rape to what is now called birth rape is ludicrous. I have no doubt the trauma for these women is very real, but find another term for it. It resembles actual rape in no way, shape, or form. Anon74 says, many women who have survived real rape have said that their birth rape was as bad or worse. The FBI's legal definition of rape includes having anything inserted in your genitals without your consent, which would also cover vaginal exams, amniotomy, and many other procedures. Having it done by a doctor, nurse, or midwife does not make it any less of an act of violence and, yes, rape. I'm very sorry for your experiences. I hope you can find some way to heal, but you don't get to tell women who have been violated what they can call their experience. Anonymous 8976 says, I'm an incest, rape, and molestation survivor too, and I can think of no better term to define this brutal act. Aria says, in SA, South Africa? In SA, someone can be raped by numerous objects, not just a penis. Raping isn't necessarily sexually motivated. Birth rape is a correct term. It cannot be anything else. Your basic right of choice is taken from you. Anon66 says objects are inserted into the vagina and severe trauma caused to the sexual organs without consent, and in fact, often against the express wishes of the victim. I'm not sure what part of this fails to fit the definition of rape. Nokomis says, have you ever been birth raped? No. Then how could you make the comparison? I've been raped a number of times actually and recovered quite well. Then I experienced birth rape. I'm here to tell you that birth rape is by far the worst sexual trauma I've ever experienced in my life. It was the most horrific experience I've ever had. It broke something inside of me that my actual rapes, quote, quote, never managed to break. Having anything inserted into your vagina against your will is rape, period. In the birthing circumstance, and allow me to point out that birth is a sexual experience, you typically have an IV in your wrist, an epidural in your spine, and a Foley bulb catheter in your bladder. You couldn't walk out if you tried. So there you are, restrained and in sheer terror for your life and your baby's life, with random strangers sticking their fingers and other implements up you without your consent. You have no control. You're probably exhausted, haven't had food or water in hours and hours, and they're telling you that if you don't get this baby out now, they're gonna cut you open. Explain to me how this is not rape, how this is not sexual torture. Shame on you. Charlotte says, this is pathetic. When a doctor allows you a certain amount of time to push the baby out and the baby isn't coming out, it's a risk for both you and the baby. So in order for the baby to come out, they need assistance of tools or a C-section. How is it that you think you know better than a doctor who has spent 10 plus years of his or her life learning about the profession, when you, on the other hand, have had no experience delivering a baby? A woman decides to get pregnant, and in order to deliver a baby safely, they go to a hospital to be monitored. There are procedures doctors do to make sure the baby is delivered safely, and both the baby and the mother are safe. Having an IV is to deliver you fluids so you don't get dehydrated. An epidural is to relieve you of your pain. Nurses check your cervix to see how many centimeters you're dilated. And in order for that to happen, they have to use their fingers. For crying out loud, can you get educated, please? So many women complain about so many damn things when in reality we have it so much better than a large portion of people on this planet. I'm so sick of people rambling about things that don't matter when there are many more and much bigger problems in this world. Be grateful for the shit that you have. Ugh. Anon74 says, Charlotte, I almost didn't approve your comment, but you just feel like you won if I didn't. I'm not the one who is uneducated here. For example, I've had 4 children, 1 by cesarean and 3 at home. I've studied birth for 14 years. I've never had an epidural. I've only ever had an IV with my eldest because they were inducing me. Strangely, women have these things called mouths that let them stay hydrated during labor, except in extreme circumstances. Cervical checks, like the majority of hospital procedures you mistakenly believe keep you safe, are not only completely unnecessary, I haven't had one since I had my first child, but often detrimental. They are certainly not so vital that they need to be done if the mother is saying she doesn't want one. Please do some research on evidence-based maternity practices. You'll find that most of the things done in hospital are actually the opposite of what the evidence shows is safe and healthy. No one is claiming or has ever claimed that having a cesarean or cervical exams or an instrumental delivery in and of themselves is birth rape. They are, however, if the woman has said no. Doctors are not gods, and they do not have to live with the consequences if they are wrong. No one cares more about the baby's health than its mother, except in extremely rare circumstances. Also, you may only be able to care about one thing in the world, but most of us can manage a great deal more than that. This is a major issue. It is a feminist issue, a reproductive rights issue, and a basic human decency issue. How a woman's birth goes affects how she parents, and it affects the mental and physical health of mother and child. If the health of our next generation isn't important, I have no idea what is. SRSLYCNTBLVTHS says, first off, we are not. Are you serious right now? Secondly, if the baby dies because you wouldn't allow the doctors to do their job, he would be fired for malpractice and sued 6 ways from Sunday. So yes, in those situations, they were completely responsible for what happens in the operating room. So what you're saying is that if your baby is stuck and suffocating and the doctor says, I'm going to have to go in there, and you tell them no because that's rape, and they were to allow your baby to die because you stopped them, you'd be okay with that? Glad you're not my parent. Anon74 says, part of me thinks you're trolling, but part of me thinks that you might actually be serious with this nonsense, so I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt. First of all, no woman is going to refuse to allow a doctor to do something because that's rape. It's the lack of consent that makes it rape. I'm not sure why this concept is so difficult. I'm not even going to touch on the more insane idea that any woman would refuse a genuinely needed procedure to save her child. Many women consent to completely unnecessary procedures because a doctor tells them it's needed to save their baby and they trust their doctor. Also, a woman who refuses to consent to a procedure and loses her baby might try to sue, but it would be immediately thrown out because she went against medical advice. So, nice try at scaremongering there. With the rare exception of cerebral palsy cases, even women whose doctors seriously abused them and or injured their babies have trouble getting anyone to take their case so long as both mother and baby are alive and the injury wasn't the result of actual negligence. By the way, it is never a doctor's job to do things to a conscious, competent patient without their consent or against the patient's expressly stated wishes. FYI, if you're going to correct something that was obviously a typo in such a snotty tone, you might want to make sure that your own post doesn't have any errors. Caroline Forbes says, Anon74, thank you for writing this. You're a superlative writer, and I've learned a lot here. I've always been a feminist, but never had children, so I don't pay much attention, but you are very eloquent and well-informed, and I feel so much more enlightened on this issue in your work. Thank you for dealing with dumbass commentators and being a light for other women. Caroline Forbes. Kat, K-A-T-T, says, my doctor wanted to fist me to make sure my previous incision hadn't opened during my vaginal birth after C-section, and because I wrote that I would not consent to that specific procedure, she came in screaming at me and informed me that I couldn't tell her what she was allowed to do to my body. Cervical exams are unnecessary and very little help. I had one done after 6 hours of labor and was only at 3. I was told I wasn't progressing and needed to be induced. After 3 hours of fighting the doctor and telling her I was exhausted and needed to rest, I hadn't hardly slept in 5 days because my husband told me he wanted a divorce and I was distraught and couldn't stop crying. I finally fell asleep and a few hours later went into labor. She told me I was wasting her time, and when her screaming and telling me I didn't know what I was doing, that I had to obey her, that I was going to kill my baby, she finally told me to go home since I was wasting her time and wouldn't obey her. I had my daughter not even 45 minutes later on my bathroom floor and had a 45-minute drive home that my ex rushed home, and I was feeling the urge to push on the highway. We were limited in options on hospitals and didn't have time to make it to the other either. But that doctor very much abused me. She'd also threatened to break my water so I'd have to stay. Anon74 says, I'm very sorry you were treated that way. I wish there was some way to sanction doctors who act like that, but no one seems to care. Hopefully that's changing with so many speaking out. Lucy says, Charlotte, please don't assume these women here are uneducated or inexperienced. You have no idea of their background. Educate yourself on the countless experience of many women regarding birth rape and the countless medics who have testified to having witnessed these. I myself had my first child in hospital and was induced against my wishes. A sweep was performed without informing me whilst doing a vaginal examination. Then my waters were broken and I was given pethidine. I had only been laboring for a couple of hours and just wanted to be left alone to rest. Swiftly after that, the baby came, thankfully no cutting or tearing. Then I immediately witnessed 2 midwives pulling on the umbilical cord until it snapped. Thankfully low enough down to then pull it with the remainder of the cord. I was so stressed with the events that I wondered if they had damaged the womb with all this rushing and forcing. There was no reason for it other than the fact that it was in the middle of the night and midwives were changing shifts and getting impatient. I wrote a complaint letter and received an apology and reassurance that my womb wasn't damaged. I don't claim to have been raped. Thankfully, the one part of my birth plan they did stick to was no male doctors or staff. If men were involved in any of these actions, I would have felt violated. I put it all down to poor judgment and haste from the midwives, but I count myself amongst the lucky ones. It wasn't as peaceful as it could have been, but it could have been so much worse. Please read theunnecessarian.com and educate yourself. Regarding this service that you defend in terms of these types of violent interventions, let me testify that my following 2 births were at home. No time to get to the hospital. Both in under an hour without painkiller, midwife. No cutting, no tearing, just joyful and without stress. Women, after all, have been designed to birth children, with or without an education. We are grateful to the medical profession, but they are assistants, not mothers or life givers. SS says, pethidine is a very high-dose pain medication and not one used for labor inductions. Are you sure that was the medicine they gave you? Anon74 says pethidine is quite regularly used in labor, particularly in Australia and the UK. Tolly says, that's blatant disregard for procedure. They teach to never pull on the umbilical cord to remove the placenta. It can cause the placenta to tear, leaving it inside, and cause infection and death. I had a doctor do the same thing to me with one of my babies. The placenta ripped in half. They said they were concerned about the amount of bleeding, never noticed, sent me home, and I luckily passed the remaining placenta, the size of a large grapefruit, the next day. This was after they told me I wasn't in labor and tried to send me home, getting angry with me when I told them my water just broke. Doctors can be wonderful when you really need them. Saved me and my 5th baby during an emergency C-section, but sometimes you really get some bad ones, and I've had 3 bad ones of varying degrees. And one good with a poor bedside manner. Don't yell at your patients when they ask a question, but otherwise good. Had one at home, and that was great. Doing it again this time. Truly, when you're the most helpless, they should be on your side, not forcing their way on you. So many stories I don't ever want to tell again. Claire Carter Mosley says, you need to read and learn things before you write about them. Did you not know that a woman's body naturally pushes out the baby eventually, even if she were not to push, or in some cases gentle pushing is needed? If hospitals weren't so impatient to get the baby out and free up a room, then our bodies would be able to naturally birth at our own correct speed. Your body and baby know when it's time in most cases, unless you're at risk for something that would cause complications. Andy says, my pelvis is fused. I was the survivor of severe sexual trauma as a child, but had no idea that I had sustained an injury that had caused this until my pregnancy. So I had no idea that I was at risk. Luckily, there is some sort of timetable for labor to be seen as not progressing normally. All women's bodies cannot push out a child at any speed. My child is alive due to medical intervention. I would have labored until death had this not been the case, not to mention the likelihood that my child would have been stillborn. It was other women who made it seem as if I had somehow failed or that my child's birth was any less miraculous because I required a C-section. Anon74 says, no one here objects to required and consented to medical interventions. We're against forced, non-informed, non-consensual interventions, especially those which involve insertion of any fingers or objects against the will of the woman. H. Pretorius says, okay, I'm young and haven't been raped or have had these experiences, but my best friend who was only 15 and pregnant was birth raped, and when anyone, drives a fucking tool or hand or fingers or anything while you're laying helpless on a bed with wires and tubes sticking out of you, it is rape. Sure, they do need to stick their fingers in to measure and to help, but why don't you, Charlotte, go get pregnant and go and experience it for yourself? If you were more educated of rape, then you would have a different view. Natasha says, Charlotte, your comments are pretty ill-informed and obviously not formed from traumatic experiences, like so many of the women who posted here. Your advice is for people who have experienced trauma to shut up. I believe you may do well to become educated and informed with life experience and maybe realize that medical intervention can be brutal in situations where it is delivered by people who don't care for the well-being or future of the patients. H says, you're so ignorant. Your naive belief in the absolute goodness of the medical profession is wearying. Jennifer says, it is rape, and for you to deny it isn't is foolish. Rape doesn't have to be with a penis. Natty says, please remember that rape is rape, and just because you've survived a certain kind of rape or multiple kinds of rape doesn't mean you should downplay anyone's idea of rape. To me, that's like saying male rape isn't legitimate. Rape is rape, whether it's a rape you've experienced or not. And if someone feels that they were raped during their experience with birth, then we need to have empathy. I'm a rape survivor myself and multiple forms of molestation, and what I've learned is to never downplay someone's trauma. My trauma may be different than yours, but it's still a daily struggle for me to cope with, and to call someone's rape illegitimate because you haven't gone through it is simply rude to me. Premium says, at first I thought rape was a strong word for this. Then I thought of what I had to endure during childbirth and slightly avoid the same thing when it came to forceps by a male doctor that was not my OB. I felt like he was a pervert, and the way he presented himself was very unprofessional, and I did not want him down there any longer. So I got rid of him. So yes, I can see how this is a form of rape. Some stranger trying to convince my OB to shove a foreign object into my vagina to get the baby out. It's scary, and he wouldn't say why. So yes, it seems to me that's a form of rape. I told him that was not an option, so C-section it was, after fighting the C-section for an hour. It's really disappointing when you can't give birth the way you've planned, and it's alarming to find a strange man you've never met staring at your crotch touching you and wanting to shove an object into your vagina to get the baby. Veronica B. says, Anon74. Firstly, have the decency to list your name as I have if you choose to reply to my comments. Secondly, I'm not disagreeing that what these women are experiencing is not a traumatic event, just that another term could best be served to describe it. I stand by my earlier comments and will continue to do so. The survivors of these traumatic events should get together and solidify their complaints, especially if it is happening at a few particular hospitals and those associated doctors. Get help for the emotional trauma they're experiencing, as I have for my problems. Perhaps they could get together as a support network to help each other, and that their partners could also go to understand how devastating it was and continues to be in their lives. Finally, I wish them all well with their lovely bundles of joy, both now and in the coming years. Anon74 says, I'm anonymous because this is my site, and after my husband received death threats for a far less controversial site, I choose to protect my family and remain anonymous. There is a difference between birth trauma and birth rape. Birth rape in most cases fits the FBI's recently revised legal definition of rape. Quote, the penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person, without the consent of the victim. Close quote. Kathleen says, Lady, you sound very close-minded, and I am a rape and incest molestation survivor. My dad beat my mom to a pulp my whole entire life. You are not the only one in the world that has been through crap. I'm sure you're damaged by what has happened to you, but so are these women, and they've gotten together to create a term for what has happened to them. Doctors have shoved forceps into these women against their will, gave episiotomies the wrong way, didn't stitch up their body correctly. All of these things are against the woman's will. Not having a caring doctor in a labor situation can lead to all types of problems and butchering of the female organs. I know these women happen to be very much suffering the same as a rape victim. They most likely blame themselves, have repeated flashbacks of the pain, and not being in control of the situation, just like rape victims. One friend of mine was forced to push a 9-pound baby out, and she can't even laugh or sneeze, or she will urinate on herself. Not to mention how the husband acts after not just the change in weight, but the change in sex when things don't go right. Other things can happen too, like vaginal and uterine prolapse. Why don't you do some medical research and get an idea of what that is like? Or how about rectocele? I'm a medical student, and I can't even imagine how much pain and the aftermath of what these women go through, not to mention the body disfigurement. That is the name that women have come up with that have suffered malpractice in their labor. I think you have suffered a lot. I think if you have suffered a lot, you should be a little more sympathetic. It's really self-centered to be like, oh, that's not my situation. That's not like my situation. I don't think that's right. You should educate yourself on things that can go wrong with labor. Focusing on another's suffering can help you take the focus off your own. Focusing on what happened to you only will make your situation worse. As victims ourselves, we have to look at the bigger picture and realize that we're not alone, and we can all stand together in suffering as women and help one another. God bless all. And it looks like they're coming together to make a support group right here online, and I support birth rape victims and all rape victims in the road to recovery. Veronica B. says, whilst you are certainly entitled to your opinion, I too am entitled to mine. I choose to disagree with you, and that's the bottom line. And no, I'm not closed-minded about what those women have been through. If you had read through what I said fully, it was not to deny what happened to these women, only to find something else to call it. Know Your Own Heart says, my first ever birth experience was a traumatic delivery during which the OB shoved my daughter back inside of me after her head was already out. Twice. Imagine that if you can. She was pushed back inside. The room was full of chaos, and my daughter was eventually ripped out of me, dead. She was over 12 pounds, and everyone was focused on getting her to breathe and come back to us. When the swarm of people left the room, including my husband, to be with my daughter, the doctor came back in. We were alone. Without warning, he shoved his arm up my vagina and into my body. He was elbow deep, ripping placenta from the walls of my womb. He did it aggressively, without warning, and when I cried out and gasped out a question about what he was doing, he informed me that I was not a typical delivery. He didn't warn me, prepare me, try to be gentle. I felt his watch under his gloves, or otherwise make any attempts to behave remotely humanely towards me. I was alone in a room with a masked man elbow deep in my vagina. I was terrified, traumatized, and left with damage that is still here 9 years later. Could you please tell me, in your expert opinion, what happened to me in that room? I am brand new to this term, birth rape. It offends me. It hurts my feelings. It speaks to my PTSD and my physical scars. But what else do you call what happened to me? What do you call a man tearing around a woman's vagina and womb without warning, without consent, and without witnesses to the medical necessity? 8 weeks later, the same man, at my postpartum visit, sliced my scarring open the entire length up the inside of my vagina and then burned it with a cautery knife. Once again, he had no consent. Only an exam was consented to. He gave no warning. He used objects to violate my intimate places. Please, woman, please, you who knows, tell me what I went through. Tell me I was not medically raped. Tell me what this is. But let me warn you of this. Changing the term to fit your own personal comfort level does not change what happened. It won't undo the trauma. The scars won't go away. I won't suddenly be able to hold my own urine. I won't stop being deathly afraid of vaginal exams and pap smears. Changing the term does not change anything for me or for you or for any other woman. I hate the term rape. I have seen what rape does to a person. Given the definition, however, pay attention to that, to the definition, not your discomfort. I do not know another word for it. If you do, please enlighten me, and God bless you if you can. Anon74 says, I'm so sorry for your experience. It sounds horrific. If you feel up to it, please file a complaint against him. Even if it doesn't immediately make a difference, it should result in immediate termination and charges as far as I'm concerned. It will go on his record, and further complaints will eventually end up with him getting fired. It's likely he already has complaints, and your report may be all that's needed. I hope your daughter is okay now, that you have a supportive family and friends, and that somehow you find a path to healing from your horrific experiences. Sean Me says, Anon74, she stated in her post that her daughter is not okay, that her daughter died during the birth. Just read more clearly next time. Anon74 says, I did read that, Sean. I was just hoping that they were able to revive her baby. I know of several women who have had babies who were technically dead at birth who were revived. I apologize deeply for any pain I may have caused if this was not the case. Know Your Own Heart says, I apparently replied under the wrong comment a minute ago. Sorry. They did bring her back, but with lasting damage. The recovery was extensive. I apologize that I did not word that one more clearly. I was in such shock from reading the article that I did not articulate well. She's a beautiful growing girl. I did try to get this put on record for that doctor, but he had not recorded the birth the way it happened. He put it in very different terms, which is itself quite upsetting. I did leave my feedback online so that women going to the site at least know to look up the maneuvers he used on us before going to him. I did start an online group for us. It is on Facebook, Traumatic Birth Stories and Support. There are so many women who come out of birth feeling traumatized and violated. It is truly upsetting. Please, Heidi Meyer says, please add me to your birth trauma Facebook support group. Know Your Own Heart says, here's the link to the group. Blah, 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 blah. Sue Smith says, I feel for you. I too had a horrible forceps delivery and my baby was ripped out of me. She was sick for a few weeks, even turning blue on me once, but healed and was healthy after that. I lost a lot of blood, broken tailbone, uterus felt like it was falling out of me, and severe lacerations. My doctor's partner delivered me and he was nasty and mean, like it was my fault my baby had fetal distress during the labor. I went to my doctor for my 6-week checkup and he came in the room with all kinds of pissed off. I didn't know what his problem was. He rammed a speculum up me and I didn't even feel healed. Horrible pain. Then he tells me I could resume having intercourse and storms out and slams the door in my face. Short version of a long story. I felt like it was birth rape and have had 38 years of PTSD for it. Went to a wonderful woman doctor for my next 2 deliveries and never experienced anything similar to these first monsters. I think some of these doctors just take these types of birth complications out on a woman. I think that's what happened to me. Forget doctor do no harm. They do even more harm than there would have been. Anonymous says, this is all very horrifying and just shows how careful women need to be when choosing their doctor for their birth. They should also have a loved one with them that they can trust. Tali says, make sure they aren't intimidated easily, these loved ones. Sometimes doctors will go behind your back and get permission for procedures you didn't agree to by telling them lies. Typically that you or your baby will die if they don't give them permission to do XYZ. Anon22 says, in my opinion, yes, it would be traumatic. However, all I would be concerned about is getting the baby delivered safely. I, as a woman, would not care if someone slapped me or told me to shut up. Again, at that point, I would just want my kid born healthily, and if there's no time to talk about it, then so be it. Narita says, how misinformed you are, Anon 22. You don't care about being slapped about when in labor as long as the baby gets out. It isn't necessary to slap a woman to get a baby out. You should care. Why should it be okay to slap a woman who's in labor when it is a crime to slap a woman if she's standing at the kitchen sink? If you do not educate yourself a little better about the birth process and what happens in the maternity system, you'll quite likely end up damaged goods yourself. Who in their right mind says it's okay to beat me and abuse me at the most crucial and vulnerable time in their life? Do you not think that violence against a pregnant and laboring woman is also violence against her unborn child? What decent-minded human being abuses an unborn child? What decent human being advocates physical, emotional, and psychological abuse of a laboring woman and her unborn child? It's a bit like saying it's okay to force a woman to have sex against her will because, after all, she wanted to go out on a date and you don't care about being slapped around a bit as long as you got your date. That is called date rape, and it is still rape. Please do yourself a big favor and do not get pregnant until you have done some serious homework, for your own sake and for that of your future children. White Valkyrie 1988 says, that's because you see yourself, a woman, as merely a vessel, an object whose purpose is to deliver the baby. Internalize misogyny much? Lucy says, Anon 22, are you actually a woman though? If you are, you have some growing up to do. Just because you are in need doesn't entitle you to be abused. With that mindset, how would we treat children, the elderly, and the sick? This is utter nonsense and extremely dangerous advice. CTV33 says, wow, society has come so far with their audacity. I understand how one could be victimized by a brutal attack, whether it's rape, incest, molestation, or assault of any sort. But to sit there and say the doctors, nurses, and hospital staff as a whole are vicious sex fiends, mind you, the intent was not sexual in nature, that are out to get you and humiliate you is just ignorance. I apologize for my strong words, but I will not apologize for expressing my opinion. Also, while you're looking up the FBI's definition of rape, why don't you look up the classification as well? They are not holding women against their will and attacking them with foreign objects. They are bringing a life into this world the best way they know how. Let's see you go have a baby on your own, no medical staff, and have that baby come breech. What are we going to do when all of these new terms and crimes prevent us from having any sort of medical care when we need it? Like we already have seen? I'm not saying that women, men, and children haven't been victimized by any doctor or medical staff. What I'm saying is quit throwing all medical professionals in the same category. Using a phrase like birth rape is meant to catch your eye, just as it did mine. Don't let these catchy phrases rule your thoughts. If you're really this passionate about this topic, do some real research without bias. Don't let all the bad people in the world cloud your vision and prevent you from seeing the good in the world. I'm sorry for all the victims in the world, but please don't make it easier to become a victim by lowering the threshold. Anon74 says, quote, they're not holding women against their will and attacking them with foreign objects, close quote. Actually, they are. I've heard far too many stories of women screaming no, while medical staff, and sometimes even their partners at the orders of medical staff, are forcibly held down while being penetrated by fingers or amnio hooks or other medical instruments. I really don't understand how people do not understand that this is rape. The motivation of the staff doesn't matter. In no other profession or branch of medicine would you get away with ignoring the refusal of the person who hired you. Quote, let's see you go have a baby on your own with no medical staff and have that baby come breech. Close quote. Thanks, I have. 3 times. No breech babies, but I was prepared for that and know several women who have birthed breech babies either accidentally or on purpose with no professional. And it actually amazes me that any woman who have experienced birth rape returned to the medical profession for any reason, much less birthing. Also, I don't believe I've ever said or even implied anything about the medical profession as a whole. A very dear friend works as a labor and delivery nurse, and I know of many other nurses and even a few doctors who work to empower birthing women and respect their choices. There is, however, a very paternalistic culture in medicine that causes far too many to not only think they know better, but to also think that gives them the right to force procedures on people who refuse. OBs are particularly bad for this behavior, probably because all their patients are women and our society has a history of infantilizing women and believing we're incapable of making informed decisions about ourselves and our children. Mandy says, actually, they are attacking us. I was held on the bed screaming while my doctor and two nurses took turns shoving their whole hand in me to get rid of the lip that my cervix had left. I was later allowed to push it through. Because of what they did to me, it took me weeks to connect to my son, and I was not able to have an extended breastfeeding relationship with him. I have been raped. Being birth raped is much more awful. I hope I never have to live through this again. Just Lost Now says, did it ever get any better? My son is 7 months and it still feels like he's not my baby. Narita says, oh, Just Lost Now. That has made me well up big time. I felt the same way. My daughter was everybody else's baby but mine. What they did to me took her away from me. I was then left to try to pick up the millions of tiny shattered pieces and try to put the impossible puzzle back together and somehow care for a child that wasn't really mine at all. I don't know how you get beyond that feeling I wish I could tell you how and make it better for you, but I don't know how. I can only suggest that you fight to find a counselor who will help you get well and work through what has been done to you so you can connect, and so that if you choose to have another, you will not be carrying the baggage of this birth experience. Please don't wait any longer. You may well have PTSD, and that often comes with depression. This can be repaired with the right help. I was able to some extent to block it out, but I was dramatically changed. I can never go back for another child. I wanted a whole bunch of them, and I do not trust the medical profession, which could, of course, have a detrimental effect on my health outcomes. Neither could I stand to be around women who went back to have another baby. I couldn't understand how they could do that, not realizing that not everyone went through what I went through. I didn't realize until many years later that I had subconsciously dropped all my friends who had more babies. I walked out on a doctor once who suggested that I better get a hurry on if I was going to have more kids. Well, I guess OBGYNs and their midwife wives get treated like kings and queens when they have their babies. The trauma can have lasting effects on you, your family, and your future life. Please don't wait to get help. You deserve better, and your son needs his mother, and he needs her to be well and connected. Watch him. He's probably trying desperately to connect with you as much as you want to connect with him. Mothers are the most important people on the planet. I can say, though, that my daughter is grown now, and we are joined at the hip. We have a very good relationship and have a bond that won't be broken. I have never and will never tell her the story of her birth, but she realized it was not the happy event it should have been. I truly wish for a speedy recovery for you. Narita says, rape in whatever setting is about control and power and not so much to do with sex. So no, hospital staff are not all sex fiends, but they are about power and control. Power of another human being, power over a woman at her most vulnerable and indefensible, control over her body and her baby, control of hospital schedules and protocols, control of funding and costs and things that have nothing to do with bringing a baby into the world. You do not have to have intended to cause harm to actually cause harm. If they cut off your leg by accident, they still cut off your leg. So if they traumatize a woman and leave her with PTSD, it doesn't matter what they were thinking when they did it. The thing is mostly that they weren't thinking at all. And if they were, it was about themselves, about their schedule, not the baby's. At no time is it ever okay or even necessary to physically, emotionally, or psychologically abuse or violate a woman to bring a baby into the world. Never. Rape is rape. If you knew what you were talking about, you would know that this behavior is absolutely counterintuitive to bringing a child into the world safely. If you have children at some point in the future, prepare yourself and prepare yourself well because yes, doctors and nurses use all sorts of techniques, including humiliation and degradation, to coerce patients into complying with their wishes. And for your information, women are taking legal action against medical staff for abuses experienced during childbirth. Hospitals are taking action against medical staff who are abusive bullies. Women are delivering babies safely at home. If you had an ounce of research under your belt, you would know that healthy women with a healthy pregnancy are actually safer having their babies at home than in a hospital. Scientific research has proven it to be so. Perinatal nurse who will lose her job if the hospital finds out she's researching this says, CTV 33, I'm a perinatal nurse with and a PhD student writing my dissertation on this subject because we nurses see it all the time. I appreciate that you are trying to be fair to medical professionals, but as one, please let me tell you that this happens a lot. Please, please, please do not diminish the pain and trauma of the women who experience obstetric violence. I won't. I promise that. It happens more in some hospitals than others. In the hospital where I work, women are given no choices. Their biological processes are not respected, and the outcomes for the woman's genital integrity and long-term damage are quantifiably worse than in better hospitals. There are doctors who do not care at all. They are impatient with nature's process. And yes, as a woman who's been raped by a penis, I do think this is rape, too. In any context, when a person inserts fingers, instruments, or anything else into a woman's vagina, especially forcefully and without explaining it to her, the trauma is very similar and it meets the legal definition of rape. The physical consequences are worse. Here's an example. There are docs in my hospital who will shove both hands into a woman's vagina before the baby has descended into the vagina, when nothing is wrong. Why are they doing it? Because they can. And the severity of injuries which this causes is truly grotesque and utterly unnecessary. The doctors who do not do this do not have the same horrible outcomes. The women don't know what is happening, so they think the baby caused the tear. No, rape caused it. Valkyrie says, thank you for talking about this. I hope you don't get discovered. I also hope you don't get fired. What do you think are the psychological reasons the doctors do this? Are they misogynistic? Are they jealous that women can give birth and want to ruin the process? I don't get it. Have you ever researched home birth or unassisted birth? I really don't think birth is an automatic medical problem. I think it can be in some cases, but in most cases, if we leave it alone, it is healthy and safe. Jacqueline says, I know this is happening. This happened to my sister, and I witnessed it as well. My sister was verbally abused, and the nurse that was supposed to help her was frustrated and took it out on her. The other sister physically pushed a pregnant woman on the bed while she is in so much pain, and all she wanted was to stand to ease the pain. These incidents happened in our local hospitals, like Koch Brumer, Groot Schur, and most of all at Retreat Maternity Ward. The nurses are just plain rude. It is like they treat you like a nothing, but yet these people get away with it. Sunny says this is appalling. Miriam said, when I had my fourth child, I had a male doctor, though I had had a female for my previous births. I had had an episiotomy for all 3 births, so obviously had a thick scar from those incisions. Having no anesthesia of any kind, I had horrendous burning and kept trying to pull my legs out of the stirrups, all the while asking the doctor why I was burning so bad. It turned out that I was tearing and he was just letting it happen. Can you imagine how thick that skin was after being cut and sewn 3 times? He had the audacity to tell my husband, I thought she could do it, as if I had some control over the flexibility. He totally ignored me as if they were my audience. CMS says, God bless you all. You've all been through hell. I'm sorry to know this horror has happened to you. Anyone with a daughter must look out for them. Kirsten says, I've been raped, I've been molested, I've been hurt and thrown away. I'm a survivor who's still healing after 10 years of sexual trauma that ended 13 years ago. And all I feel for anyone who says they've been raped is heartache and compassion. I have nothing but sadness and hope for your healing, and I'm shocked that anyone on here could have the audacity to tell you whether or not you were raped. From one survivor to another, may you find peace and healing from this awful attack on what should have been one of the most beautiful days of your life. XO. Harmed, it says, I was held down and had objects and body parts shoved into my vagina while I was fighting and screaming as loud and as long as I could. I had bruises on my arms and legs from being forcibly restrained. After this was done, my abdomen was cut open while I was strapped down to a bed screaming and crying. Would you call this rape? It happened at a hospital after a home birth transfer. It was done by healthcare professionals. It was rape, but it was birth rape because I was in labor at the time. At the end, I came home with a baby and PTSD. Anon74 says, I am so sorry. Harmed says, thank you. I'm 8 years out with a lawsuit, which I won, and countless hours of therapy, including EMDR, under my belt. I still can't drive by the hospital without a flashback. There is no better word to describe what happened to me and countless other women than rape. Rape is about control. Violation of bodily integrity is the way this control is exerted by the rapist. SLKDF, KAJSDF says, why can't you simply call it birth trauma? Rape has a sexual connotation that should not be applied to insensitive doctors, unless of course they actually rape their patients. Harmed says, birth trauma can be caused by difficult birth, shoulder dystocia, cord prolapse, exceptionally fast labor, etc. Birth rape involves the violation of your body against your will. Anon74 says a birth can be traumatic without being birth rape. Why should women who have been violated have to change how they refer to something just because it makes others uncomfortable? Survivors of both real rape and birth rape have said that they were equally bad or that birth rape was worse. By law, asserting anything in a person's genitals without their consent is rape, even if the person doing it is a doctor, nurse, or midwife and tries to claim some medical excuse for their behavior. Survivors should not even have to add the clarification of birth to it. Read the stories. If it was anyone but a medical professional who committed these crimes, you would never remotely attempt to claim it was anything other than rape. Lucy says, semicolon SLKDF, semicolon KAJSDF, this is not about the doctor. It is about the victims and their sexual reproductive organs, what they experience towards the most intimate parts of their own bodies. Just because you became pregnant and gave birth does not mean you automatically have no say over how your body is treated, particularly since you have to deal with the damage to your own body and mind afterwards. Dylon says, there's no denying the horrors that certain doctors have committed on patients, but I think that labeling this birth rape ignores the larger issue at hand. The problem is doctors not doing what is best for the patient and going against their wishes, and that is a problem that all patients can face, not just women who are giving birth. Perhaps an organization that dealt with corruption in the medical community would be more helpful than one that just focuses on women who give birth and ignoring people who are affected by this issue who do not give birth. Men, women who don't wish to have children, male to female transgendered. My deepest sympathy to any victims of horrible doctors, but what is labeled here as birth rape seems to be a form of medical malpractice. Medical malpractice is a problem that affects women who are pregnant, women who aren't, men and transgender individuals. Perhaps a more inclusive term like medical rape who work better in terms where the medical malpractice involves violating the wishes of the patient in any situation. I feel in our patriarchal society, women who give birth are given more respect than women who don't, which is ridiculous. A woman has a choice to not have children, and the implications of the wording birth raped implies that people who don't give birth aren't affected by this, which is also ridiculous. Fully respect and support your cause. Thank you for making me more aware of this issue. Carolla says, it is rape. It is as real as conventional rape. Just because the rapist wears a white gown does not make it any different from any other vicious rape happening in a dark alley. I'm a survivor of both conventional and birth rape and found birth rape the far most vicious and traumatic of both. It was horrendous, and having my child present inside me while it happened makes it all the worse. Anon71 says, whatever you call it, birth experience can be both physically traumatic and emotionally so. There is sometimes a coldness, insensitivity, and lack of compassion amongst practitioners when they provide care for multitudes. Women are always imposed upon in this delicate position of vulnerability. My first child, there was a conversation about the politics of the day. A nurse and relative pushed down on my stomach rather than let me raise up from supine position, and I was asked, what did you expect? Did you think it would be easy? Pelvic trauma from childhood rape, which had not been medically addressed, contributed to other difficulties with the childbirth, and post-delivery care was negligent, probably enough to file malpractice. Women rarely talk about these things because these topics don't fit into polite speech that we are trained to engage in. I wish I had not been enslaved into such a submissive mindset when I was younger so that I could have advocated for better care in the process and in care afterwards. No one listens. Miranda S. says, I am a survivor of incest, molestation, workplace sexual assault, 4 rapes, and 1 rape attempt by someone who I thought was a protector. I can safely say that birth rape is as real as it gets, and right up there with my incest rape. I've been in prison as well for standing up for what I believe in and going against this chauvinistic society. And the things I've had to endure in there, rape, beatings, and torture, are nothing compared to birth rape. This needs to get out. Valkyrie says, wow, that's awful. What were you in prison for doing? Fighting back against an abuser? Justice Croft says, I was raped and have a 13-year-old son from that rape. I've already been through so much at only 17 years old that the birth of my son only further traumatized me. I was forced and held down by nurses and my doctor, then literally fisted by my doctor as I cried and screamed. The fetal heart rate wasn't down. My son was healthy with no complications. As you lie there with strangers all around you that don't care about covering you up, or mutilating your private parts without consent, it's the birth, not the rape, that has stuck with me over the years. It's what's fueling my obsession to read about this online in a desperate effort to find someone that understands how I feel. I'm now 31 and pregnant with my husband's and my little girl. I'm 8 months and fully intend to labor at home until the baby is practically crowning. Our insurance won't cover home birth, but no matter what the consequence, I won't go to the hospital until the very end. Is this what medical society wants? Women handling things themselves again, like a flashback of abortions with coat hangers back in the day when abortion was illegal? Because that is where it's headed if they don't get their hands off of us and let our bodies do what they were built to do. Rape is a perfect definition. Just like there is anal rape, vaginal rape, this is medical rape, and any woman that has had both or all three would not disagree with the term for medical rape. Or they are lying and just want to be dramatic and opinionated. The radical one says, I'm not one to blame everything on sexist men, but in this instance of childbirth, the shoe fits. The medicalization of childbirth started back when men wanted to take birth out of the hands of women and out of the home so they could have money. Anyone who forces you on your back, touches your private area, or does anything to you in any sexual way without your consent has committed a sexual crime against you. Birth is sexual. It is our private body that is being invaded, and no medical professional should do anything without the woman's consent. People have the legal right to refuse medical treatment even if they're dying, yet somehow women aren't even people anymore with basic dignity and rights when they enter a hospital to labor. I believe birth rape is real, and anyone who doesn't needs to wake up. It is not good for a woman to be on her back in labor anyways, as it makes labor more difficult and painful and goes against gravity. Yet the medical profession places a woman's feet in stirrups, restrains her on her back, slices her open, and forcibly holds her legs back. If that isn't rape, please inform me exactly what is. It is the same as someone holding a woman down and forcing her legs apart to shove a penis inside her. Both acts are sexual, personal, and involve the invading without consent of the woman's private body. The mother and child would be healthier in almost all cases without that interference, so there's no excuse for it whatsoever. I had a home birth, and my midwife never touched me but once when I asked her to check my cervix. She and her apprentice were nice and very calm. They didn't talk to me, and they were only there when I asked them to be and needed them. I was never touched at all. The truth is, women should not be touched when laboring or birthing. As long as there is a soft place for the baby to land and somewhere nearby to make sure the mother and child are safe, all will be good. Look at other cultures. The women are active or even dancing in labor and then squat over a specially prepared place to give birth when they're most ready. Until recently, men were not allowed to be near childbirth, or at least most used to until the last few decades. Another thing is that a woman needs privacy. I only had 2 females around me. My husband was not there, and I don't think any father should be. Absolutely nobody knew I was in labor but my midwife, her apprentice, and my husband, who of course purposely left but stayed close enough in case of emergency. Birth should be left to women. Women need peace and solace in labor. Because of the privacy I received, I labored peacefully, and the birth itself did not even hurt. I was shocked when I looked up and realized my midwife had already caught her. I was just so at peace in my own little world, I just went with my instincts, and it was so amazing. Bottom line, the medicalization and masculinization of childbirth has caused many women to be emotionally scarred for life. That and the Western belief in Christianity that has indoctrinated us that childbirth is a painful curse put on a woman leads to birth being viewed negatively, and in return it is a negative experience for too many women. Birth is sexual, and nobody should ever touch a woman without her consent. Megan says, firstly, I also had a home birth for my first and planned one for my second, which didn't end up happening. My home birth was somewhat like yours. My midwife hardly touched me but stayed close enough to help with anything I needed, and only my midwife, myself, and my husband were there. I do think that the husband should be there myself. However, don't kid yourself into thinking all labors at home are nice. My son's was 20 hours long, and I would have gladly shot myself in the head had I had a gun. The pain was so intense. I do believe home births are better than hospital. I do not like people touching me, and it would make me furious if any of these stories had happened to me. My second child was born in a hospital after only 10 minutes of being there, and even with an easy birth, the hospital still managed to make the one-night stay miserable by telling me my blood pressure was high. No duh, just pushed out a baby. Yeah, it should be really low, not like I've been pushing or anything. And insisted on checking in on me, waking me and the baby up every hour on the hour. Miserable night. It's nothing next to what the women on here have experienced, but it goes to prove that even with the simplest, least complicated birth, the medical community just can't leave you alone. They have to do something. Also broke my water as the baby was coming out and clamped the cord immediately, which we specifically told them not to do. They can't help but interfere. They just can't keep their hands to themselves. Caroline Forbes said, awesome, thank you. I'm so much better informed now. Caroline Forbes. Barbara says, my midwife inserted a pill called Cyotec, an ulcer medication that also increases contractions, inside me vaginally without my consent. I found the dissolved tablet on a tissue, which I used when going to the toilet. I believe I was birth raped with this cheap, horrible drug which nearly cost my baby's life. Just Lost Now says, my mother-in-law moved in with us. We were living in their Florida house. She told me I would have a doctor or midwife present and prenatal care, or I could get out of her house with my 2 kids at 36 weeks pregnant. I hadn't been working because we moved there when I was pregnant, so I had no money of my own. My partner was all, I'd like to let you leave, but I'm afraid you'll never come back. I was a foster kid, so I had no one to run to. I cried my eyes out and opened my legs. They tell me I should be grateful. My first daughter and my second were unplanned teen pregnancies. I dealt with the pregnancies and the infant care so much more easily. This baby was planned, and I don't really want to look at him. I don't feel like he's my baby. She chose his birth. She rearranged his nursery in my bedroom while I was in labor. She kept calling him her beautiful baby son. I can't bond with him. I attachment parent and exclusively breastfeed. I still can't bond with him. So much more than is described here happened. It feels like I malfunctioned, but somewhere in me I know I've seen farm animals do the same. Fuck with them and they abandon their young. He's almost 7 months old now. I'm about to take my daughters and leave my perfect planned baby with his dad. He's not mine. He's just not. It doesn't feel the same at all. Anonymous123 says, in my own personal opinion, medical rape is a term that I would use. I was forced to do a pap and pelvic exam while restrained. Afterwards, the 2 doctors sexually abused and raped me. I struggle with memory loss after the pelvic exam. I consider them both forms of rape. I'm not saying one is worse than the other. I would never say one is worse than the other. Personally, I felt like I was fighting for my life and mental health when I was raped. When I was having the speculum forced inside, I felt violated, confused, and medically abused. Megan says, I had my first child at home, so thank God I did not have to go through anything like this. My second was several weeks early, and out of fear that her lungs were not developed. We went to the hospital, and I had her within 10 minutes of arrival, so nobody had time to fuck with me. She ended up being just fine, and I got out without anything at all. I avoided hospital births specifically to avoid anything like this. I don't do pap smears, I don't like IVs, I don't like catheters. I refuse the idea of a C-section. I didn't want an episiotomy. I didn't want pain meds. I was lucky enough to avoid all of the above. Also, I get focused when in pain or angry, so I was literally able to fill out an admission form while pushing. Excuse me. Nobody was going to tell me I couldn't make my own decisions. Screw 'em. Also had my cousin there to intercede and back me up in case anything went wrong. Vicky says, I'm so sorry these experiences have happened to you. I'm an obstetrician and very much in favor of leaving women to labor peacefully without interference whenever possible. If any intervention looks likely, I'm very careful to counsel ladies very specifically about what I might need to do before I do it. There is a careful balance in appropriate consent without causing unnecessary alarm. Unfortunately, things can move very quickly in labor, and that can be quite overwhelming. In these circumstances, I do go over events afterwards to help answer any questions the lady or partner may have, and this best practice that everyone should be following. I would be devastated if anyone felt as some of you do after a birth I'd assisted. Unsurprisingly, I'm a huge advocate for women making informed choices. Please don't tar all medical professionals with the same brush. Jai Ludvik says, since you're an OB, you should discuss with labor nurses about handling patients roughly. I'd say most of the abuse in maternity wards is done by labor nurses rather than OB-GYNs. My OB was not even in the room with me when a labor nurse held me down and shoved her hand up my vagina. She did this very forcefully. I asked her to stop and she wouldn't. I wound up having a C-section, which I wasn't opposed to, but the next day 2 female aides came into my room and forced me to stand up out of bed even though I was in extreme pain. I'm going to the hospital again soon for another C-section, and this time I will be taking down the names of every healthcare worker who enters my room for any reason. Hi says, that is sick. I heard of the occasional shut up, but damn, she's bringing another life into this world. She deserves respect. Doug Cheney says, the sad fact is that people are bent to do evil, even the ones that think, yes, but not me. This issue, like so many other issues, is full of legitimate complaints while at the same time full of crap also. Many things like this obviously fall through the crack of being either criminal or right simply because there are just so many situations and people involved that can easily become virtually impossible to have a system that is able to prevent criminal abuses of professionals. People, not just women about to give birth, are so often just not in the right frame of mind to make their own decision about what is best for them health-wise. You can hate that fact and vehemently argue about it till the cows come home at the end of the day. As a statement in general, it is going to stand solid as a right general statement. When someone is in a motorcycle wreck with compound fractures, etc., they are in shock and might very well not make their own decisions. Hate if you want to or whatever, but if someone with their tibia jutting out of the skin, bleeding profusely, decides they are going to stand up and walk, typical of the terrible decision-making ability of someone in shock, I personally am going to violate this person's right to make his or her own decisions, and I'm going to physically restrain them against their will. They can cry lawyer or rape or whatever, but I'm going to do it for them exactly what I would want them to do for me if our roles are reversed. Now, I'm sure everyone here can apply the thinking of this situation to other medical situations, where professionals have to deal daily with people who are physically not in a state to make their own best decisions. Is this going to be abused ever? Of course it is. There are incompetence in every occupation where it is like a sin that they even have the job they have. But look how complicated the situation is in general, how hard it is to improve on, how utterly impossible it is to fix so no one violates another person in what really truly would be criminal. In the mix is a very significant number of people that are whack jobs and totally incapable of being honestly reasonable. People that are 24/7 pain in the royal ass for anyone that has to deal with them, which is why I say that a lot of the legitimate things people know needs to be addressed, need to be fixed once and for all, just are not going to ever be. It is part of the very sad state of affairs of living in this world with people who are bent to do evil on some level at some time. It's just a daily fight to keep from being a victim. That's a given. But then there's also the opportunity each of us has to at least want to make things better for those we're dealing with, to want to be honest or upright, to want in our hearts to not be part of something evil, but rather part of something good. Whether we even really understand what is best, at least there is the choice to want to have a right heart. No? Who stops anyone from choosing that want to? Anon74 says, I'm approving your comments because I think you're trying to be fair, but there are some major issues. We have laws and requirements to determine if someone is in their right mind or not, and we have those for a reason. Pregnant people are competent to make medical decisions for themselves and their babies unless a court, not an OB, decides otherwise. If someone is incapable of giving or refusing consent, their support person is the next person in line to decide. If there is no support person or legally designated medical decision maker, then and only then do medical people get to make decisions for someone else. Given that pregnant people are competent to make medical decisions, those decisions, including informed refusal, are required to be respected by the medical professionals around them. If the medical professional strongly disagrees, they can attempt to verbally convince the person to change their mind. Medical professionals don't get to violate people to do what has already been refused. Someone in shock after an accident is not even remotely the same as someone in labor. Doug Cheney says, I think it's a correct observation that something need not be sex to qualify as rape. I am not a woman, but whenever anyone has violated me, not even physically, it is like a form of rape, which no doubt is why all the physically sexual terms get applied to all the violating that people do to one another. As a related aside, I hate the way certain types of theft and fraud are categorized as non-violent and white-collar crime that the law typically handles with kid gloves as though they are not really the bad, dangerous criminals. But personally, I would rather be held down and sexually violated or tortured somewhat than to have someone defraud me out of having the means to feed my family. If someone commits a non-violent white-collar crime against a family which ultimately lands them in the street, that is violent. As violent as a rape would be to many people. I mean, everyone is different with what they deal with, but my point is that it all goes way beyond what someone might judge looking at it from the sidelines. A person knowingly violating another person without their true best interests at heart, honestly. It already is moving right into the same qualification as assault and rape and defraudment. Shame on the wicked. Shame on mankind that we put up with what we do. Shame on every one of us that make light of other victims simply because it does not apply to me. Which boils down at various times to shame on me and shame on you too. Sue Smith says, as a child, I was finger raped by a pedophile. I didn't know what was happening to me. I was very young and I only knew it was bad. As an adult, I was birth raped by my OBGYN's SC. I did not have a name for what happened to me 38 years ago at my first childbirth. Now I do. I didn't have a name for the dark cloud of depression that would come over me when I had to drive past the hospital or the doctor's office my rape took place in. It is strong wording, that reflects strong emotional scarring left because of cruel and insensitive healthcare professionals. My doctor was on vacation and his partner delivered me. The doctor never spoke to me the entire labor, filled with fetal distress and other complications. When I finally felt I had to push, they held open my legs like I was a wishbone. I thought I was going to break, and started rushing me to delivery because I think the fetal distress had gotten much worse. I was given a saddle block spinal and strung up in some kind of contraption. Next, I felt the baby being pushed back up me and turned. It was excruciatingly painful. Then the baby shot out of me like a bullet. My husband told me the doctor used forceps to turn the baby and how she shot out of me. The baby was crying and the color looked pretty good from what I could see, but they got her out of there quickly after the APGAR. As the doctor sewed me up for an hour, I asked him how many stitches there are since I had to go home and take care of this new baby. He, very snarly, like a mad dog, said there were an average amount. Really? He could have at least had a tiny bit of empathy. I felt like death. I could hardly breathe. I lost so much blood. After the saddle block wore off, my entire pelvis felt kind of numb, like it was run over by a truck. My tailbone was broken. My uterus felt like it came out with the baby and was pushed back up, and I walked by, shuffling my feet from the lacerations. I was never iced. Took 2 days to get a donut to sit on for that tailbone pain, which probably only added to the swelling and bruising. Imagine standing on a broken ankle for 2 days. I was cold and the hospital didn't have blankets, so I was told. When I took a shower the next day in the hospital, I felt as if I was washing the violent birth off of me. I remember how the warm water felt so good on my sore body and how weird to feel such an emotion like a rape victim washes away the rape. I'll never forget that. I was left out of there in 3 days, and the only thing the doctor told me was to not have sex for 6 weeks. No problem with that advice. Trying to take care of the new baby and heal from that birth was horrible, and I rested as much as I could. I went to my original doctor for my 6-week checkup. Another horrible experience. He came in the room all kinds of pissed off. Didn't even ask how the baby was doing, even though she had a recovery of her own I had to deal with. The baby did not feel good. She even started turning blue once and didn't move like a newborn should. It was a very hard delivery on her too. I should have left the exam at that point, but I trusted in my doctor and got ready for the internal exam. He carelessly rammed a speculum up me. I felt raw and unhealed and was in excruciating pain. He got done quickly. I sat up. He grabbed my folder and said I could resume having intercourse and stormed out of the room and slammed the door in my face. I sat there in a state of shock and asked myself if this really happened to me. Was this real? I was in another place mentally. I'm not sure where that was. I limped over to my clothing and threw them on and left. I couldn't speak. I was hysterical driving home and bleeding from the exam when I got home. I'll end this story now. There's more to it, but the rest is not that important. Birth rape? We need to call it something strong, something that reflects 38 years of PTSD from the experience. I did go on to have 2 more children and never experienced anything even similar to this experience. This is what happens when your healthcare professionals are monsters. Anon74 says, I'm so sorry for what you experienced. I'm glad you were able to have better experiences with your other children, but I know it never erases the abuse. Alex Lynn says, I'm currently 3.5 weeks postpartum. I never knew what birth rape was, though I was molested and raped in childhood, and was so shocked when the on-call doctor disregarded everything I said, belittled me, and didn't guide me so that I wouldn't tear. First of all, I've been having contractions for 2 months without dilation, thanks to buildup of scar tissue from rape. And since my waters hadn't broke, they sent me home numerous times. I was embarrassed but understood, though I didn't like being the joke of the hospital because of how often I came in during my 3rd trimester. My water broke on my due date. My OB swore to me that I would just know when it broke, and when I was having real labor contractions. My water was leaking so slowly over the course of 48 hours that I had no idea until I came in on October 7th and they did an exam and checked for fluid, only because I said I had barely more discharge than before. The contractions I felt for weeks before delivery felt exactly like the ones I had right before pushing. I wasn't dilated even 1 centimeter, so, against my pleas, they hooked me up and started Pitocin. I went into labor shock, where I feel okay, but my body is shaking uncontrollably, and they gave me a sedative. Then, the nurses threatened that if I didn't get an epidural then, at 3 centimeters, I wouldn't be able to get one at all. I was terrified of a natural birth, so I agreed. At this point, I've been in active labor 20 hours. The doctor came in, attempted to break my waters while I was so drugged I couldn't stay awake. Without even asking or telling me, and almost no fluid came out. I was nearly out without realizing for days. They gave me penicillin to help my baby stay healthy. Then the doctor left. Around 9 centimeters, the epidural started to wear off. I could feel my legs but not my hips. I asked if they could refill it. They said, no, you're going to have to feel yourself push. Okay, I could understand that. I'm not one for confrontation, especially in dealing with professionals who I thought cared about my well-being. At 10 centimeters, the meds had completely worn off. I was in so much pain. Earlier, the nurse inserted the catheter and promised she'd remove it when I started pushing. She lied. She made me push for nearly an hour and a half without removing it. Each time I asked, she said, just 2 more pushes and I'll remove it. Just 3 more pushes. Over and over. It was miserable. I could feel everything, so I didn't see a need for the catheter. I was even able to walk right after delivery. She removed it 5 minutes before the doctor came in. So the doctor comes in after I've been pushing for an hour and 45 minutes. I was begging him to help me get him out. I begged even for a C-section. He tells me, nope, you need to do the work, it's your baby. I finally get my son's head out. It was 14 inches in diameter, and I'm 18, just to mention. I don't have experience in birthing babies and what to do except push the head out. The doctor starts yelling at me to keep going. I had accidentally left my son stuck at the chest inside me. His arms were tucked up near his neck, and I was making him suffocate. I cried and pushed with no help from the on-call doc, who let me deliver him sunny side up. And then my request for the delayed cord clamping was ignored. The doctor had my husband cut it, then instead of letting me deliver the placenta, he forced it out by harshly pulling the cord less than 2 minutes after having my son. The placenta that I wanted to save and capsulize came out in 3 large chunks due to him ripping it out of me. I wanted to die. I was in so much pain. I was bleeding much more than I should have and almost needed a blood donation to save me. The doctor then began shoving his fist deep into my swollen and throbbing stomach while I was still on Pitocin, so still having contractions, to force the clotting. I screamed and begged for more epidural, only knowing that as the meds I could have. And he laughed in my face. I finally was at my limit and whispered, give me drugs or stop pushing on my stomach. He then said I couldn't have an epidural since the baby was out. I told him that I would take anything to stop the pain. He had a nurse give me a shot of some meds in the thigh while he gave me internal stitches. I was miserable, and they then told me that I didn't have to pee even though I knew I did. I got up on my own and walked to the bathroom to discover I couldn't go without a catheter after pushing with it in for so long. They made me sit in a wheelchair even though it hurt worse than walking, and as the lullaby music came on over the speakers to announce a baby was born, I sobbed all the way to my room. I didn't get delayed clamping, skin-to-skin contact, guidance on when to push and how to do it correctly, and was pressured to get an epidural too soon. Denied pain meds for 20 minutes, had my placenta yanked out of me without permission, then not even allowed to walk, though I was able to. It was a violation of my body, my rights, and caused so much physical pain that I couldn't nurse or hold my son for an hour. After my son was tested positive for high-risk jaundice, the nurses also ignored me completely and gave him formula, though I could have pumped milk, and a pacifier, which I didn't want him to have at 24 hours old. It was such a horrible hospital stay. If I decide to have another child, I'm looking at midwives and birthing centers as alternatives. Anon 74 says, oh, Alex Lynn, I am so sorry your experience was so terrible. Sue Smith says, perinatal nurse, thank you for advocating for your patients that have gone through unnecessary, cruel, and even criminal procedures giving birth. Equals birth rape. I understand the position you're in about losing your job. Say something about the pillar of the community, doctor, and get fired. They would never treat their wife, sister, daughter, or colleague's family like that. All women giving birth deserve respect. Sometimes things happen quickly and there's no time to discuss every little thing that's happening, but there's plenty of time afterwards to talk with a patient. The physical trauma heals, but the trauma in one's mind never goes away. Good luck with your paper, and thank you once again for your empathy and compassion for the humane treatment of birthing mothers. Bonita says, I gave birth at night at the hospital on a Sunday. My doctor wasn't there and a young intern student attended me. After I gave birth and the placenta came out, he put his fist inside me and pushed his arm until I screamed to stop. He also shoved his fist in my anus, saying he was putting everything back in place. No more kids for me. Valkyrie says, did you report him? If you report him, he may get fired. It sounds like he is a rapist. Lucy says, why minimize women's real and traumatic experiences when they finally find a place to share and gain understanding and support? Clearly, there is room to be reflective within the medical profession, as with any profession. Let's find ways to listen and work with clients and recipients during one of the most intimate, important, and vulnerable points in their lives, and that of their blessed children. Edmund Zebra says, how is that rape at all? Unless the doctor's penis went into patient, it doesn't count. And yes, you have to be told to shut up or told to breathe or something that you don't want because you have a freaking baby and there are risks to its life if you don't do certain things. P.S. If I'm 15 and can understand this is wrong, how can't you? I swear some adults of your generation are stupid. Anon74 says, I strongly debated deleting this comment, as I do all the other inappropriate comments I receive on this site, but given your age, I have hopes that you're simply uneducated. For starters, it's clear you didn't read the post you're commenting on at all. You see, the definition of rape includes the insertion of any object, not just a penis, against the person's will. It doesn't matter who is wielding the object, nor what their intent is. So yes, it does count. The doctor in question doesn't even have to have a penis for it to count, just like with any other rape. Secondly, most of what doctors do or want to do in hospital births actually makes birth more dangerous. This fact is evident to anyone who has ever compared the scientific evidence to what actually happens in hospitals. It's clear you've never been at a birth nor looked at any of the scientific evidence, understandably since you're 15, but it's incredibly rude for you to presume that you know more than those who have experience and or decades of research on their side and declare that you know more and those who are actually are educated are stupid. Facts beat opinions. You have an opinion. The facts do not agree with your opinion in this case. Next time, at least read the article. Valkyrie says, fuck off. I don't care how old you are. No excuses. Besides, if you read even half these comments, you'd realize that most of these are not medically necessary and cause even more distress for the mother and baby. Also, women have the right to do whatever they want with their fetus legally, whether this is right or not. A woman has the legal right to abort a baby if she wants, and I'm not saying this is a good thing, but it also means she has the right to decline whatever medical treatment she doesn't want also. Unathi says, true.